talk about the blessings of same-sex peoples during from the article, the document that came out from the Vatican on Monday. So I want to start off here. Father James Martin, who many people know, and many people know I'm very critical of Father James Martin, and I'm still very critical of Father James Martin. But Father James Martin is, in fact, someone of influence. He is the second most followed Catholic on social media, second only to the Pope himself. He also holds a position under the communications branch of the Vatican. He also was a voting member of the Synod on Synodality. He also has received personal letters from Pope Francis, and he also has several meetings with the Holy Father. And so his opinion about these things seems to have some sway. And I actually agree with his take on what's happening here. So I want to play clip 2 for a second here. And here is him talking about in a podcast inside the Vatican about what exactly is his interpretation of what's happening with the new document.
I'm truly that in a pastoral setting, in a theological setting, something good is seen in same-sex relationships, right? In Pope Francis's comments, of course, which are more off the cuff, he talked about same-sex couples and LGBTQ people, but this is a pretty significant opening. They're basically saying there is something good here, and God can accompany people in these situations. And it permits priests and deacons and bishops, and I'm assuming, I'm not sure about this interpretation, but other lay leaders, right, Catholic pastoral associates, to do these things, to bless these couples freely, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I expected, if this document were to come out, it would say something like, well, this needs to be approved by local bishops' conferences, or the local bishop will decide this, right, or the pastor. No, it leaves a lot of latitude up to the individual minister, which is also a surprise. I think that's kind of going unseen. This is pretty broad.
Yeah, so this is really interesting to see Father James Martin's comments on this, because I'm listening to it, and I've listened to the entire podcast. We'll play a little bit more for you in a minute, but I don't see really too many things where I would disagree with him on his interpretation of what the document is actually doing. Now, obviously, I think it's not good, and he thinks it is good, and that's the main difference between he and I. But his actual interpretation of what's happening is spot on. He posted a picture yesterday of himself blessing this homosexual couple where they're holding hands. And sure enough, people were in outrage saying, see, James Martin's already going off the handle. And I kept on asking people, what exactly in the picture you see violates the document? Can someone explain that to me? And nobody could explain why it was. They simply were outraged by the picture. And I'm saying, look, guys, I also don't think that he should be doing this. But according to the document itself, someone please explain to me how it is that he is wrong. So we're going to get into that next, because a lot of people are saying that nothing changed and there's nothing wrong. Everything is still hunky-dory. So we're going to get into the actual text of the document coming up in just one moment. Now, this document, all the headlines across the globe say Pope Francis approves of same-sex blessings. Is that the case? Well, I want to start here. And I told you yesterday we'd be very practical. Today we get into kind of more of the minutia. And I'm reading this book, Two Timely Issues by Arnaldo de Silveira. And he wrote this book in 1969. It was published in 1970. And here's something he says, and I think it was very, very interesting. And we've read this passage a few months ago, but it's worth repeating. And this book, again, it's a pretty dense book theologically, but here's what the text says. It says, furthermore, considering the situation only in the abstract, it is not licit to forget that, at least until breaking with the Church, heretics usually present their doctrine by alternating orthodox passages with confused, ambiguous, suspect, and heterodox ones. Accordingly, in the hypothesis being analyzed, in addition to losing much of their favorable significance, the Orthodox text raise one more reason for grave suspicion. We desire to abstract from person and ponder the matter with all scientific rigor. Now he goes on, and I highly recommend reading this book. It's excellent. He goes on to talk about the modus operandi, and then he gives examples throughout history of Arianism, Pelagianism, monotheism, Protestantism, Jansenism, modernism. And he goes through explaining how they act, how they kind of present their position, stating, I totally believe in the Orthodox position, 100%. And they spend this whole time espousing the Orthodox position, and then they give a bait and switch. And they say, actually, we don't believe in the Orthodox position. He says at the end of this section, he says, in summary, the preoccupation with disguising themselves is particularly acute among the progressivists, who know very well that the faithful would immediately repudiate them if they knew their real designs, thus affirming the traditional doctrine and then revitalizing it to the point of concluding the contrary of what was just said in a characteristic tactic of progressive neo-modernism. It was one of modernism. However, in addition to being a tactic, this way of proceeding expresses a basic element of neo-modernist metaphysics, or rather, it forms part of the dialectical, Hegelian, and pneumenological anti-metaphysics of neo-modernist. Now, that was a huge, ginormous jumble of jargon, which is not really important to get into that. So, the last thing I want to bring up here is an example. So here he brings up an example of what exactly he means. He says that he gives the example of Father Bernard Herring, who was a peritus, an expert, and he wrote a book on marriage in the modern world. And here he says, in the text of Father Herring, several contradictions appear. He said it's particularly significant that one of the first paragraphs, he declares, naturally, the church's principle remains firm that divorced persons whose first marriage was valid in the sight of God and their conscience have no right to remarry, and that a civil marriage is no true marriage. And then later on, he then starts to hedge that and starts to change his mind, and he contradicts himself. Why does he do that? Well, it's because he wants to be able to say whenever he has critics, oh, look, no, if you read the first paragraph, I clearly stated the Orthodox position. I clearly said marriage is insoluble. Marriage is always there. Divorce is not an option. Oh, yeah, that other passage over there says something different, but you have to read that passage first. The reason why I bring this up, and this chapter was excellent in trying to understand the way this works, it's very, very good in that sense, is because you read paragraph 31 of this document, and then you read the rest of the document, and they are contradictory. Because the vast majority of the document is pretty much fine. It's pretty much A-okay. The majority of the document says, oh yeah, we affirm the teaching on marriage. Of course, this is a sin. Of course, the church would never change its teaching on this. But then you go to paragraph 31, and it says, within the horizon outlined here appears the possibility of blessings for couples in irregular situations and for couples of the same sex. This is very, very important because many, many people are saying, no, this is a blessing for individuals, not for couples. But I'm curious, how do you say that if you actually read the document? Because the document says in paragraph 31, quote, the possibility of blessings for couples in irregular situations and for couples of the same sex. That is a huge deal. This is a huge deal. Now, and then it has a comma, and then it goes on forward, and it says, the form of which should not be fixed ritually by ecclesiastical authorities to avoid producing confusion with the blessings proper to the sacrament of marriage. So it does this over and over again. It'll say something very, very heterodox, something that is like jaw-dropping, like, oh, how could you say that? And then it'll pivot and say, not to be confused with marriage. And it does this over and over again. It's a giant bait and switch. So that way the people will be able to come out and say, oh, no, you have to see clearly he's saying that you can't do this. But it leaves a ginormous gaping hole in the wall for people like Father James Martin to drive through it. And I can't see why Father James Martin is wrong. So I want to play this clip of Father James Martin going through this document himself and explaining what he sees in it. And we'll play some of that clip for you.
Yeah, practically speaking, it means that priests, deacons, and bishops can, in certain circumstances, bless same-sex couples. Now, that, as you said, doesn't mean that there is, same-sex marriage allowed in a sacramental way in the church, and it also means you can't do it in a way that may make it seem like it's a marriage. But it's a big step forward because, yesterday I couldn't bless same-sex couples publicly in any sort of setting. Now I can.
The thing about blessing same-sex couples is,
and that's a big deal, what he said there. The reason why that's a big deal is because Father James Martin is very, very clever. He is an intelligent man. By no stretch of the imagination is he a fool. Father James Martin has been very careful. This is why he's always able to say everywhere he goes, oh, I'm in good standing with my bishop. I'm in good standing with my community. Because he always toes the line and he walks on that line where he doesn't cross over to violating any laws so he can't be punished. And so he's always walking down the line. He will say outrageous things, which I think he should be punished for. Like saying, for instance, that he prays for the day when homosexuals can kiss each other during the sign of peace. And that's a obviously disgusting thing that he would say. But is there anything heretical in him expressing that opinion? Well, I would argue it's at least heteroprax, a bad practice, but it's not heterodox. And to just say it, he's very, very careful about what he says. Very, very careful. So the fact that he says, oh, yesterday I could not do this and today I can, means a lot, especially considering the reaction from many of the bishops, which maybe we'll be able to get into in just a second. But let's continue playing that clip.
Same-sex couples is only a small part of this, and it mostly even focuses on the question of blessings for people in what the Vatican calls irregular unions. So that's, divorced and remarried folks. That's people, as was often talked about at the Synod, in polygamous relationships. And then it could also...
And that blew my mind because I kept on asking myself, okay, what do they mean by irregular situations? What is a couple of irregular situation that would qualify in this category that are not same-sex couples? Because he makes a distinction: irregular situation couples and couples of the same sex. So one, they're saying that couples of the same sex are, one, not irregular because they don't fall under that category, and two, they're saying that this is a category of thing. And this woman who is the host of this of their podcast said that the Synod, they said that polygamous relationships are under the category of irregular situations. Now, that is jaw-dropping. Okay, now maybe they mean polygamy in the sense that divorced and remarried is polygamy, because if you're divorced and remarried, you're still married to your first spouse, and so technically you're in a polygamous relationship. Maybe that's what they mean. I really hope they don't mean currently actively civilly married to multiple people at the same time, but I have no idea. The thing is, Father James Martin does not correct her, and he was on this committee. He was specifically on this committee, but let's continue listening to this.
So be same-sex couples. Can you talk me through this theology of blessings?
Yeah, so before, in the response in 2021, the line that everybody remembers is God cannot and does not bless sin.
Right, which really hurt some people. We talked to folks on Inside the Vatican about that.
And in fact, Pope Francis was not too happy with it. And I was just looking it up. Removed from the CDF was Father Morandi, who apparently was the chief author of that. So there was a sense of Francis himself not liking the way that was framed. But it's clear there's now a turnabout. And what does it mean? Well,
how does this build on, or does it contradict?
Here's a big deal, because here he's talking about the document that came out in 2021 under Cardinal Ladaria. And whenever this came out, this was a huge thumbs up. There was a huge thumbs up. Everybody was like, see, the Vatican's not changing anything. Everything's hunky-dory. Everything's going great. And then this document comes out. And here's the trick. And this is why I read this Two Timely Issues first about what he says here, is because they say this is a development of that doctrine that was taught in 2021. It was said that this is a development of that. Almost all the footnotes in there are quoting Pope Francis himself in his documents. But the 2021 statement says the blessings be of an individual person and not a relationship. That's what it said in 2021. It also said when two people are blessed together, the relationship or partnership is blessed along with the persons. This is why it can only be a blessing of one person. The emphasis on the plan of God as defined in this document is specifically designed of God for human sexuality. It goes on from there, but 2021, that is what was said. That's what was said in 2021. Now, Fernandez is saying this is a development of that, and this is not a contradiction. But remember, I just read to you what it said, that there appears a possibility of blessing for couples in irregular situations and for couples of the same sex. The word couples there is the biggest deal. Now, we're going to go back to what Father James Martin is talking about here. Let's play that.
Build on, or does it contradict the 2021 statement? Can you explain that a little bit?
I think it doesn't contradict it in that it doesn't set up sacramental marriage for same-sex couples, right? So it is not saying that the traditional teaching is now abrogated, but it is a development. I mean, I think we have to be clear. Sometimes people sort of skirt around these issues, but this is a change, and doctrine does develop. We know that most recently, for example, on the death penalty, probably the most public example, when there was still a bit of an opening, and now the door is shut on that, on the death penalty. Further back, we have the Second Vatican Council with changed teaching on our relation with non-Christian denominations.
I mean, this is a big deal. He's very clearly saying that things have changed. That's what he's saying. So I think these things will have to be addressed and more. I mean, these things will just have to keep being addressed and break down piece by piece, because this is probably the most clear disastrous situation we found ourselves. But we have to remember, we must always pray daily for the virtues of calm, courage, and confidence, recognizing that Our Lady said that these things would happen. She said there would be bishop against bishop, priest against priest, but in the end, her immaculate heart will triumph. So do not despair. We'll be right back. We've been talking about the document. Let me see if I can pronounce it correctly. Fiducia Supplicans. I think that's right.
That sounds pretty
right.
close. I'll give you like a 7 out of 10.
You know, I'll be honest. I get classical and ecclesiastical Latin confused. And so whenever it has like the CI, I'm always like, is it Fiducia or Fiducia? The sh or the
Fiducia Supplicans.
Here's another thing. Okay, side note, you just made me think of it because you gave that accent. Why is the title in Latin? There's no Latin text.
Yeah, they haven't released the Latin text
because
yet.
The way they name the
hilarious.
documents is they take the first two words or first couple words of the text in Latin, and that's the name of the document. But there is no official Latin text.
Yeah, there's Italian.
It's basically
Spanish,
every major language.
Every major, except for Latin.
Except for Latin, which most people will be like, that's not a big deal, whatever, right? But it actually is a big deal, because the Latin text has always been considered the official text of the document. So if there's confusion about a translation issue or what does a word mean, you should go back to the Latin. This obviously is for scholars. Yeah, for context.
Yeah.
This is for scholars, of course, because I mean, I don't read Latin. My Latin is very, very poor. I did not do great in my Latin classes.
The only Latin I know is lorem ipsum.
Lorem ipsum, the one
that's
that
a graphic designer.
designer.
It's just like garbled placeholder text. Lorem ipsum, dolor.
That's hilarious. But it's interesting though, because the argument about, okay, what does the text say? It creates more ambiguity because people are saying, okay, well, I guess we're going to just treat the Italian like the original text, or we're going to treat the Spanish like the original text, since Spanish is Pope Francis' first language and Fernandez's first language. And so now there's debate about even that, which I thought was interesting because Diane Montagna, who is a journalist out of Rome, she came out and said, question, what's the basis for the claim that the Vatican Declaration endorses blessings only for individuals and not for couples? Which I was like, thank you. That's what I'm trying to say. She says individuals, the word individuals appears once in English, but is rendered them in all the other languages. Individually appears once, but it can't support this claim. The declaration issued by Cardinal Fernandez and signed by Pope Francis intends to offer an innovative contribution based on the pastoral visions of Pope Francis. That's a quote from the document. That enables one to understand, this is also a quote from the document, understand the possibility of blessing couples in irregular situations and same-sex couples. So, yeah, that's kind of the big deal because, yeah, people are saying, well, the word individual pops up in the English. It only pops up one time. But Diane even makes the point. that's not there in the other languages. That's only there in the English, which is kind of surprising to me. And that it's difficult because I only speak English. So I don't know how to see these things in other places. Now, there's a number of other things that were very concerning. For instance, the development of doctrine. And we're playing that clip of Father James Martin talking about his understanding and development of doctrine. And this is where I think he's actually incorrect about. Usually, the majority of what he's saying, I kind of am like, yeah, I mean, he's telling the truth about what the document is. I disagree with that he's happy about it, but he's telling the truth. And this is probably the only part where I kind of disagree with Father Martin about this. Let's finish out that clip.
Opening, and now the door is shut on that, on the death penalty. Further back, we have the Second Vatican Council with changed teaching on our relation with non-Christian denominations. I mean, for a time you couldn't set foot in the Protestant church. That has definitely changed, right? And so it is a development, and it's a deepening, and it's also the reflection on people's experiences. This was talked about a lot at the Synod, that the church is invited to, and has always been invited to, reflect on how the Holy Spirit is at work in different people's experiences, and in this case, in the experiences of same-sex couples and other couples.
It's developing, and it's meant to be moving in a more pastoral and open direction. So, for example, just within the last few months, the Vatican has declared that trans people can be baptized, can serve as godparents, which...
So now I can go in my collar in some public setting and bless a same-sex couple, which I could not do before. Right? I mean, imagine if you saw me with my hand up and blessing over a same-sex couple holding hands or something. I would have gotten into trouble. Now I will not. As long as it's not in the context of a wedding. It's a big change for priests. I'd heard that this was at least being discussed in the Vatican when I was at the Synod in terms of kind of framing it as a theology of blessing. And I think it's a significant step forward. I've already heard from people who say it's too much. That's always the case with these things. It's either too little, too late, or way too much, and I'm leaving the church, which I think means that Pope Francis and the Vatican are trying to thread the needle on this.
Yes, for sure. And I think that what he says here is very, very interesting, because he says that he heard at the Synod. So this was premeditated. This was planned for months. And they told us, people were like, oh, I can't believe this happened. Fernandez told us a document was coming out in December, and people were saying it's a Amoris Laetitia 2.0. And I think this is it. And here he says, yeah, they were talking about it. I heard people talking about it, and I heard they're going to frame it as a development of doctrine on the theology of blessings. This is important to note, because the development of doctrine is such a misunderstood doctrine, because people think the development of doctrine means doctrine can change. It cannot. It is very, very clear. The church has always taught. You think about like St. Vincent of Lérins, for instance, talks extensively on this. It's very clear that we cannot have doctrine change entirely to a different meaning. Development of doctrine means that we create more nuance into a doctrine. We have a greater understanding of a doctrine. We may draw out a more precise language with a doctrine. That's development of doctrine. What development of doctrine is not is that something means something totally different from what it meant before. Then it's not development. It just changed. It's something different. And that's what cannot happen. And this is what he's saying, Father James Martin is saying, is happening. He's saying it is, in fact, a change. And from my perspective, I think he's right that it is a change. But what I disagree with him is that I disagree that it can be called a development of doctrine. Because this is a major, major problem, because if things can change, or they attempt to change things, well, that has a major, major effect on us. Now, one of the other things about the document was the straw man that were created throughout the document. It was actually kind of frustrating to me personally. They were saying, some people would say that you cannot present yourself for a blessing unless you are perfect. And I was thinking, who says that? Who can you show me the person who says that if you can't present yourself for a blessing unless you have, quote, prior moral perfection? That's a straw man. There's not a single person who would say that. In fact, I went to go find, because I was like, okay, Let's see. Let's go find the most radical traditionalist organization and see what they have to say about blessings. And so, lucky enough, the Superior General of the Society of St. Pius X put out a statement about this document, and this is what he said about blessings. He says, "Doubtless, every man can be helped by the prevenient mercy of God, and discover with confidence that he is called to convert in order to receive the salvation that God offers him. And Holy Church never refuses a blessing to sinners who legitimately ask for it. But then, this blessing has no other object than to help the soul to overcome sin in order to live in a state of grace. Holy Church can therefore bless any individual, even a pagan, but never in any way can it bless a union that is sinful in itself, under the pretext of encouraging what is good in it." There, he's referring to the fact that Pope Francis's document clearly stated, "Oh, we're blessing the good aspects of the couple, the good aspects of the relationship, because, you know, there's faithfulness there, there's loyalty there, there's love there, and that's what we're blessing." And so that's what he's responding to. He says, "When we bless a couple, we do not bless isolated individuals. We necessarily bless the relationship that unites them. However, we cannot redeem an intrinsically bad and scandalous reality. Such encouragement to proceed pastorally with these blessings leads in practice inexorably to the systematic acceptance of situations incompatible with the moral law, whatever else is said." So, I mean, that's from the Society of St. Pius X, which are labeled the radical traditionalists, right? And so if anybody was going to say, "No, you can never bless sinners," it would be them, right? And that's not what he says. He says, no, we can bless anybody, even a pagan. But it's in the context of praying for them to have a conversion of soul, praying for them that they repent of their sin. And for example, if someone goes to confession, this probably just never happens anymore, but theoretically this could happen, and technically priests should do this. But if the priest detects that you're not truly contrite of heart and that you're not really having an amendment of life in the confessional, he cannot give you absolution, but instead will give you a blessing. But that blessing is for you to have a contrite heart, for you to have an amendment of life. Or you think about when you go to confession and the first thing you say is, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." This is the first thing you say. So, of course, there is no Catholic, no matter how radical he is, radical traditionalist that he might be, is saying that you have to be perfect to receive a blessing. We're not asking you to be perfect. We're just asking you to try or to want to be perfect. I think that's the essential thing of it, because that's my prayer a lot of times. I think about the prayer of St. Augustine where he says, "Lord, make me chaste, but not yet." And I think about that because I'm like, Lord, make me perfect, or at the least make me want to be perfect. I want to want your will is something I say often, because sometimes I'm like, I know God would probably want me to fast, but that chocolate cake looks really good right now. And I go and eat the chocolate cake. And I'm like, God, let me want your will. I want to want your will. But right now, I don't quite want it all the time because it's a little difficult, I'm not going to lie. And that's kind of my conversation with God sometimes. And so, yes, 100%, if you want a blessing, go seek a blessing. And any priest will give it to you. But we cannot bless situations that are intrinsically evil, that are sinful. And yes, sodomy is, in fact, a mortal sin. 1 Peter 5 put out a great article on the topic when he was talking about this, Timothy Flanders, and he made the point, well, what if the mafia came by with his group and were like, "Hey, Father, can you bless us? We're going to go whack somebody. Can you go bless us? We want to make sure everything goes well." Would he say, okay, that's an irregular situation, but we'll bless that relationship because you guys all love each other? Like the mafia, I mean, they're tight. Big family, very loyal to one another. And so we'll bless the mafia, but we're not going to bless the murder and the espionage and the drug trades. We're not blessing that. We're just blessing the brotherly love that the mafiosos have for one another. If they did that, people would be rightly scandalized. People would rightly be flabbergasted by that kind of reaction. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we're having these discussions. The last thing that I'll note here, and this topic, the last thing I'll note here is during today, the rest of Advent is a season of penance, technically. I know, surprising, right? It's a season of penance. And specifically today, Friday, and Saturday are rogation days. Or not rogation days, Ember days. There we go. Our Ember days. And Ember days, it's not binding in the church anymore. We've kind of got rid of them over the last few years. And so I call it a holy day of opportunity. A holy day of opportunity. You're not required to do it. A holy day of opportunity where the days where you can fast and pray for the church. And so I'm going to encourage you, and I'm going to do my best to join you in doing this. I invite you to join me. We're getting ready for Christmas. Let's go to confession. Go to confession with me. I'm going to try to go to confession maybe today or tomorrow if I can. Go to confession with me. And let's fast and pray the rest of Advent. Let's fast and pray for the church, for the conversion of sinners, for the liberty and exaltation of Holy Mother Church, for the salvation of souls. Let's do that together. Will you do that with me? I would really appreciate it.